Carlos woke up early every single day, even before the sun came up, to review reports and plan new goals for his company. His office, with its glass walls and everything in its place, reflected his meticulous personality. He believed that success wasn't about luck, but the result of discipline and firm choices. With a packed schedule, Carlos rarely had time for distractions. His motto was clear: merit above all else. The business he had built from the ground up was now a benchmark in its industry. His employees respected his leadership. It was firm, but also fair. He valued competence and rewarded those who showed dedication. To Carlos, mixing family and business was like opening the door to serious problems. He'd seen many fellow business owners fall into traps by confusing blood ties with professionalism. He was determined not to make the same mistakes. Even outside the office, Carlos maintained the same rigor. At home with his wife, Anna, he kept a balanced routine, making sure to set aside time for rest and leisure. Although he was a driven businessman, Anna knew his more human side. She was the one who reminded him that behind the reports there was still room for feelings. This duality was a constant part of his life. Deep down, Carlos carried memories of a difficult youth. His family had never had financial stability, and he learned early on to fight for every achievement. This humble background shaped his worldview. He believed that handing everything to someone on a silver platter was setting them up for failure. Because of this, he hardened his heart whenever anyone asked for something without having put in the effort. His principles were evident even in board meetings. He often said, "Last names don't matter here, only competence." This phrase echoed among employees and family members alike. It was the line that separated his professional life from his personal one. But despite all this determination, a part of Carlos feared becoming too cold. Anna, watching him, would sometimes question if this rigidity was pushing away the people he loved. He would answer that it was all for the good of the family, for the stability they had never had. This conviction kept him steady, even if it sometimes made him feel alone in his decisions. Little did he know, he was about to be tested in a painful way. Life seemed to be moving along without major turbulence. The business was thriving, contracts were increasing, and Carlos's name was gaining more and more respect. But fate had different plans, and those plans were coming from where he least expected, from within his own family. On a rainy afternoon, the phone rang in his office. It was his mother, Marta, asking him to receive someone at their house that evening. Carlos found her worried tone unusual, but he agreed. He was used to minor family dramas, but this time something felt different. After hanging up, he looked out the window, watching the raindrops trail down the glass. A knot of apprehension tightened in his chest. He didn't know exactly why, but he had a feeling that tonight would change everything.
At the end of the workday, Carlos closed his report folder and took a deep breath. Whatever it is, I'm ready for it, he thought. But deep down, he didn't quite believe his own confidence. So have you ever found yourself facing a decision where family and responsibility clashed? If this story has already hooked you from the start, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any of the upcoming chapters full of real emotion and tough choices. When he got home, Carlos found his mother sitting in the living room next to a man in wrinkled clothes with a tired look on his face. It was Daniel, his younger brother, whom he hadn't seen in months. The contrast between them was immediate and striking. Where Carlos represented stability and order, Daniel seemed worn down and careless. Daniel stood up with a forced smile. He tried to hide his shame, but his eyes betrayed his desperation. "Carlos, I really needed to talk to you," he said, his voice choked up. Marta quickly stepped in, explaining that her youngest son had been out of work for months and needed help. Carlos stayed quiet for a moment, taking in the scene. The atmosphere felt heavy. Anna, who was watching from a distance, sensed the tension and brought coffee to break the ice. But her presence only intensified the feeling of being judged. Daniel began talking about his financial troubles, the overdue bills, and the pressure he was under. His story painted a picture of someone victimized by the system, but Carlos, with his analytical mind, could see the hidden flaws. Carlos tried to keep his tone neutral. He asked about Daniel's recent jobs, but Daniel avoided giving straight answers, changing the subject instead. "The job market is brutal. No one is willing to give me a real chance," he kept saying. It was clear he expected his successful brother to be his lifeline. Their mother, emotional, held Carlos's hand. "Son, he needs you now more than ever. If you won't help him, who will?" The emotional pressure was intense. Carlos took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of the dilemma he was in. He didn't want to disappoint his mother, but he also knew the risks of mixing family and business. Finally, Daniel said it directly. "I want a job at your company. You're the only one who can give me this opportunity." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Carlos looked at his brother, searching for some spark of determination in his eyes, but all he saw was desperation and expectation. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marta looked at Carlos with pleading eyes, while Anna, with her arms crossed, waited quietly. The right answer seemed obvious to everyone, except Carlos himself. For him, this decision had implications that went far beyond just giving someone a job. Inside, a battle was raging. His heart told him he should reach out and help his brother. But his reason screamed that hiring Daniel could jeopardize the entire structure of the company he had worked so hard to build.
The air in the room grew heavier and more suffocating. Carlos realized this wouldn't be just a quick conversation. It was the beginning of a conflict that could shake not only his company, but also his family's bonds. Deep down, he already knew what his answer would be, but saying those words out loud was going to be the real challenge. As the night wore on, Daniel never took his eyes off his brother. His posture was a mix of wounded pride and desperate hope. "Carlos, I'm not asking for a handout. I just want a chance. You know I can work hard if someone believes in me." The line sounded rehearsed, but it carried a silent plea. Carlos took a deep breath before answering. He tried to choose his words carefully, but his mind was racing. "Daniel, it's not that simple. My company works because every single person there was chosen for what they can bring to the table. I can't make exceptions, not even for you." His tone was calm but firm, like someone trying to close a door quietly. Daniel, however, wouldn't accept it. With each justification, his indignation seemed to grow. "So that's it? You prefer strangers over your own family? What kind of brother are you?" The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Marta brought a hand to her chest, shocked at how the conversation had turned. Anna tried to intervene, suggesting everyone take a breath and talk about it the next day. But Daniel didn't want to wait. He was determined to get an immediate answer. "I'm not leaving here without knowing if you're going to help me or not," he said, crossing his arms as if digging in his heels. Carlos stared intently at his brother. The contrast between them was stark. On one side, discipline and order. On the other, desperation and accusation. He knew that by refusing, he was positioning himself against not just Daniel, but part of his own family. Still, he couldn't give in. "Daniel, I'm sorry, but I can't hire you." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Marta, her eyes welling up, shook her head in disbelief. Anna squeezed her husband's hand in silent support. Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You really are cold, Carlos. You built your company, but you lost your soul along the way. I hope you're happy being a stranger in your own family." His voice, filled with venom, echoed through the room. Carlos tried to respond, but swallowed his words. He felt torn between the conviction of his decision and the pain of being called heartless. The weight of their judgment hung over him, and for the first time, he doubted if he had made the right choice. His mother stood up and went after Daniel, trying to calm him down, but the younger brother had already slammed the door, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence and the bitter taste of a rift that had just been born.
Carlos stood motionless, staring into space. He knew that his refusal wasn't the end of it. It was only the beginning of a conflict that could turn devastating.
The following days were heavy for Carlos. At the office, he tried to stay focused, but the scene in his living room kept playing in his head. He remembered the look on Daniel's face, a mix of anger and despair, and his mother's held back tears. No matter how much he tried to justify his decision to himself, guilt was starting to eat away at him. Anna noticed her husband's restlessness. "You did what you thought was right," she said, trying to comfort him. "But I know your mother. She's not going to let this go anytime soon. You need to be prepared." Carlos just nodded, his mind elsewhere. At home, Marta's silence was deafening. She didn't call as often as she used to, and when she did, her voice carried an unusual coldness. Carlos knew this was because she resented him for not helping Daniel. The bond with his mother, always so strong, now felt threatened. Meanwhile, Daniel had started spreading his version of the story. To close relatives, he said his brother had abandoned him in his worst moment. He painted Carlos as an arrogant man who cared more about numbers than blood ties. These words started making the rounds at family gatherings, creating subtle divisions. Carlos began getting messages from distant cousins. Some hinted that he had changed since he became successful. Others asked if he couldn't at least give his brother a chance. He could see the narrative was slipping out of his control. At work, the situation began to cause ripples. An employee who was a friend of Daniel's mentioned the refused request in the hallways. Little rumors started, questioning if Carlos was really as fair as he claimed. This bothered him more than he'd like to admit. Anna suggested he get ahead of it. "Talk to your mother. Explain your side better. Maybe if she understands your position, she can help contain this." But Carlos hesitated. He was afraid any attempt to explain himself would just sound like an excuse. The nights became long. He would lie awake staring at the ceiling, questioning how far family loyalty should really go. He thought about how hard he had fought to build his company and the risk of losing it all if he started showing favoritism. Still, the thought of losing his connection with his brother and his mother tormented him. Deep down, he knew Daniel wouldn't give up easily. The rejection had wounded his pride, and now he was turning that pain into a crusade against Carlos. The businessman felt a bigger storm was on the way. And though he tried to prepare, he had a strange feeling that this time there was no strategy that could fully protect him. Carlos went to visit his mother over the weekend, hoping to regain their closeness. He found Marta different, more distant, her eyes full of hurt. "Son, I just don't understand. Daniel only wanted a chance. Why do you have to be so hard on him?" The words cut deeper than he had expected. He tried to explain, saying it wasn't a lack of love, but a matter of responsibility. He talked about the risks of mixing family with business, and how he had seen other business owners fail for that very reason. Martha shook her head, not believing him. To her, her son's logic just sounded like coldness. "Do you really think money is more important than your own brother?" she shot back. Carlos took a deep breath, resisting the urge to argue. Deep down, he knew it was no use using rational arguments in the middle of such intense emotions. His mother could only see Daniel suffering. Back at home, Anna listened to his account and squeezed her husband's hand. "You need to be prepared. Your mother isn't going to let this go. And if Daniel keeps playing the victim, soon the whole family will be against you." Carlos nodded, but the weight on his shoulders only grew heavier. On Monday, when he arrived at the company, he noticed a strange atmosphere. An employee casually mentioned that he had seen Daniel in the neighborhood complaining about how his brother was too proud. He realized his personal life was starting to spill into his professional environment. That evening, Marta called again. The conversation was short but painful. "Carlos, I raised you to be a man with a heart, not a heart of stone. Daniel is your brother. You'll regret it if you keep this up." He hung up with a heavy heart,
feeling more and more isolated. The weight of guilt began to mix with anger. He wondered why he was always cast as the villain, while Daniel, with his history of irresponsibility, was treated like the victim. This reversal was eating away at his patience. In a caring gesture, Anna suggested they take a weekend off to rest and clear their heads, but Carlos refused. "I can't run away from this. The longer I wait, the more he'll poison the family against me." His determination grew right alongside his anguish. The mood at home was becoming tense. Anna supported him, but she also feared this conflict would destroy the family bonds for good. Despite his firm stance, Carlos couldn't shake the feeling that he was heading for an inevitable break. Deep down, he already knew Daniel wasn't just asking for help. He was fighting a battle of pride, and that battle was far from over. The following Sunday was marked by a family lunch at Marta's house. Carlos almost decided not to go, sensing trouble, but he went anyway to avoid making the situation worse. When he arrived, he found Daniel already there, surrounded by relatives. The atmosphere was full of judgment. The looks they gave him were clear. Everyone was waiting for him to make a move. Daniel, with the expression of a martyr, was telling everyone about his struggle with unemployment and how his own brother had abandoned him. Every word was chosen to provoke outrage.
Marta, sitting at the table, didn't hide her sadness. "Carlos, can't you find it in yourself to be a little more human? Family needs to help each other. Your father, if he were alive, would never have allowed this." Her words cut deep. Carlos swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. He tried to explain once again that his decision wasn't personal, but professional. "Mom, I can't hire someone just because he's my brother. It wouldn't be fair to everyone else who worked hard to earn their place in the company." But his voice seemed to fall on deaf ears. One of his uncles, who rarely got involved, decided to speak up. "Carlos, sometimes you need to lead with your heart. What's the harm in giving him a chance?" The businessman realized the pressure was now spreading beyond his immediate family. Daniel seized his support. "That's it, Uncle. I just need an opportunity. I don't want a handout. I just want to prove I can do it." His tone was convincing, but he knew how much manipulation was behind those words. Anna, sitting beside her husband, finally broke her silence. "What you're all forgetting is that responsibility is also a form of love. Carlos isn't against his brother. He just needs to protect what he's built." A few people nodded quietly, but most still seemed convinced by Daniel's side. The lunch ended on a tense note. Carlos left feeling defeated. Even though he hadn't given in, he could see his standing within the family was becoming more and more tarnished. It was as if he was the only one to blame for everyone's pain. Back in the car, Anna held his hand. "You did the right thing, but the fight is only going to get harder. They won't stop until you give in." Carlos, staring out the window, felt the weight of her prediction. He knew the worst was yet to come, and deep down, he was starting to fear that his own family was becoming his enemy. Carlos spent the week buried in work, trying to distract himself from the family storm. But even surrounded by reports and meetings, his mother's voice echoed in his mind. "You've become a man of stone." Every time he remembered it, he felt a pang in his heart. At night, lying next to Anna, sleep wouldn't come. He replayed all the sacrifices he had made to build the company and wondered if he was truly becoming too cold. Was there really no room for compassion within his principles? The following days were marked by a heavy silence from Marta. She avoided calling, and when she did speak, her words were short and clipped. Carlos realized he was losing not just his brother's trust, but also his connection with his mother. At the office, the situation didn't help. Small rumors about the family conflict circulated among the employees. Carlos noticed the curious looks, the conversations that stopped when he entered a room. It was as if his personal life had become public spectacle. Anna tried to support him, reminding him that his decision was based on solid ground. "You are right, Carlos, but being right doesn't always mean it's easy. They can't see what you see." He knew that, but the pain of his family's rejection still ate away at him.
Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to be thriving in his role as the victim. He was showing up to more and more family gatherings, reinforcing his story of being abandoned. With each retelling, Carlos was painted as more and more insensitive and distant. To their mother, Daniel had become the wronged son, and Carlos was the ungrateful son who had chosen business over blood. This role reversal hurt him deeply. One rainy night, Carlos looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, exhausted. "Was I really wrong?" he murmured. But then his reason reminded him, giving in would mean risking everything he had built. The dilemma was becoming unbearable. The businessman was starting to feel like he was alone against everyone. Not even his justification seemed to be enough. Each day, the weight of guilt became more unbearable, like an invisible sentence. And even as he tried to stay calm, a doubt was growing inside him. How long could he really hold on to this decision without breaking? Tired of the pressure, Carlos decided to take the initiative. He asked Daniel to meet him at a quiet cafe in town, away from the family's watching eyes. He wanted to propose alternatives that could help without compromising his company. Daniel arrived late with an air of indifference. He sat down at the table and crossed his arms, waiting for his brother to speak first. Carlos took a deep breath and began. "I can't hire you, Daniel, but I can recommend you for some positions at partner companies. And if you need it, I can help you financially until you get back on your feet." Daniel's expression changed quickly. His eyes narrowed and an ironic smile appeared on his lips. "So that's it. You think I'm going to beg for your charity? You want me to humiliate myself asking favors from strangers? I just want a chance at your company, Carlos." Carlos tried to argue, explaining that at his company, everyone had to earn their place based on merit, not privilege. It wouldn't be fair to the other employees. "I can help you in other ways, but not like this." Daniel slammed his hand on the table, drawing stares from everyone in the cafe. "You don't want to help me because you're afraid I'll show you I'm just as good as you are. That's the problem, Carlos. You can't stand the idea of sharing the space you conquered." The words cut like knives. Carlos remained silent for a few seconds, trying to keep his composure. He knew that any sharp reply would only feed his brother's resentment. "This isn't about that, Daniel. It's about responsibility," he finally replied, his tone calm. But deep down, he knew that nothing he said would change his brother's perception.
Daniel stood up abruptly. "Keep your pity for yourself. I don't want charity. I want respect, and you've just proven you'll never give it to me." With firm steps, he left the cafe, leaving Carlos alone. The businessman sat there, staring at his still full coffee cup. He felt defeated, not by his decision itself, but by his inability to get through to his brother. In that moment, he understood that his refusal wasn't just professional. It was a rift that was deepening with every encounter, and soon it might become irreversible. The morning after the cafe meeting, Carlos got a call from an old business associate. During the conversation, the man mentioned, almost casually, "Your brother worked for me once. He was let go for missing too many days and making excuses. Be careful, Carlos." The businessman felt his heart grow cold. Intrigued, he started making some discreet inquiries. He discovered that Daniel had been through 3 different jobs in the last 2 years, all ending the same way: irresponsibility, chronic lateness, and a lack of commitment. It was a troubling record, one the family had never known about. Carlos spent a sleepless night thinking it over. He realized his gut feeling had been right from the start. Daniel didn't just want an opportunity, he wanted protection from his own failings. That explained his insistence on working specifically at his brother's company. Even so, revealing everything to the family would be painful. He knew Martha wouldn't accept it easily. His mother still saw Daniel as a wronged son who deserved another chance. Showing her the truth would be like destroying the image of him she held on to. However, Carlos's silence only fed the accusations. Daniel kept spreading his version of events, painting himself as the victim and his brother as the villain. Family lunches became even more strained. Carlos was met with cold stares and hushed whispers. Anna, seeing his anguish, told him, "Maybe it's time to show them the truth. You can't carry this weight alone while he manipulates everyone." But Carlos hesitated. He knew a sudden revelation could sever the family ties for good. As he was thinking it over, he got a text from his mother. "I want you to come for dinner on Sunday. Daniel will be there too. We need to resolve this as a family." It sounded less like an invitation and more like a summons. Carlos closed his eyes, exhausted. He saw that the situation was reaching its breaking point. The decision was no longer just about denying a job. It was about revealing secrets that could change everything. Deep down, he feared the family would never be the same after hearing the truth. But he also knew he couldn't continue to be painted as the villain. With a heavy heart, he decided he wouldn't run away. He was ready to face his brother and the consequences.
The dinner started under a heavy cloud. The table was set with all of Marta's usual care, but the silence between courses betrayed the tension. Daniel, wearing the expression of a martyr, stayed quiet, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. Marta broke the silence. "Carlos, we're all tired of this fighting. Your brother just wants a chance. Can't you see that?" Her tone was more of an accusation than a request. Carlos took a deep breath, ready to respond. "I've already explained, Mom. It's not a lack of love. It's about responsibility. I can't put the company at risk with favoritism." The words came out firmly, but they sounded cold in the room. Daniel stood up, his silverware clattering against the table. "That's just an excuse. You won't hire me because you're afraid I'll prove I'm capable. You'd rather see me fail so you can keep being the perfect son." The poison in his voice filled the room. Marta looked from one to the other, confused and anguished. "My boys, please, I can't stand to see you like this. Is money really worth all this?" The pain in her eyes made Carlos waver for a second, but he knew he couldn't give in. Calmly, he tried to propose alternatives again. "Daniel, I can recommend you to partner companies. I can even help you financially until you get back on your feet, but not at my company. It wouldn't be fair." The reaction was immediate. Daniel exploded. "So you think I'm incapable? Is that what you're saying? That I'll never be good enough?" His voice echoed off the walls of the house, bringing tears to Marta's eyes. Carlos remained seated, in silence. For the first time, he didn't try to fight back. He just watched his brother, realizing that nothing he said would be accepted. Anna, beside him, held his hand, offering silent strength. The gathering ended in disaster. Marta was crying. Daniel stormed out, slamming the door, and Carlos was left with the feeling that the distance between them had grown even wider. On the drive home, Anna said quietly, "He's not going to stop, Carlos, and you can't stay silent anymore. It's time to show them the truth." Carlos closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision approaching. He knew the next family meeting wouldn't just be a dinner, it would be a battlefield. In the days following the dinner, Marta found herself thinking about her son's behavior. Although she wanted to believe Daniel's version of events, she started to notice contradictions in his stories. He always presented himself as the victim, but he rarely took responsibility for anything. This doubt began to eat away at her certainty. Even without revealing anything yet, Carlos noticed subtle changes in his mother. During their phone calls, she seemed less aggressive and more thoughtful. She asked about his routine and how he was handling the pressure. It was as if she was starting to see that the story might have more than one side. Anna, always observant, commented, "Your mother is starting to figure things out. But be careful, Carlos. Daniel will still use her emotions to protect himself. He knows how to manipulate her." The businessman nodded, aware that his brother wouldn't give up so easily. Meanwhile, Daniel intensified his campaign. At gatherings with cousins and uncles, he reinforced the narrative that Carlos was humiliating him and that the family was drifting apart because of his ambition. With every word, he tried to paint his brother as the absolute villain. Marta heard one of these accounts, but something about it didn't ring true. She remembered the times Daniel had lost jobs in the past, always with different excuses. For the first time, she began to wonder if there was a pattern to his story. On a rainy afternoon, Marta called Carlos. "Son, I need to understand. Is there something I don't know about your brother?" The question took him by surprise. He hesitated to answer, but he sensed that the moment to reveal the truth was near. Carlos didn't give details right then, but he said, "Mom, when a time comes, I will explain everything. I just want you to be prepared to hear it." His serious tone left Marta feeling uneasy, but also curious. Anna supported her husband's decision. "You can't go on carrying this burden. Your mother needs to know who Daniel really is. Otherwise, you will always be the one to blame." Carlos knew she was right, but he feared the impact of the revelation. In silence, Marta began to observe Daniel more closely. Small slip-ups, inconsistent excuses, and even the way he reacted when challenged started to catch her attention. The image of her wronged son no longer seemed so solid. Still, deep down, she hoped for a path to reconciliation. She couldn't stand the idea of losing the bond between her sons, even if the truth was painful. The next invitation came as an ultimatum. Marta called Carlos and said, "Sunday at my house. I want you and Danielle here. We are going to settle this once and for all." Her tone left no room for refusal. Carlos accepted, knowing this would be the decisive moment. As they got ready for the encounter, Anna held her husband's hand. "No matter what happens in there, you need to keep your calm. The truth is on your side." Carlos nodded, but his stomach was in knots. It felt like he was walking into an arena. That evening, the table was set with great care, but no one seemed to appreciate the dinner. The air was thick with tension. Daniel arrived with his head held high, looking at his brother as if he were a sworn enemy. Marta watched, deeply distressed.
Right from the start, Daniel took the floor. "I'm not going to stand for this humiliation any longer. I want everyone to know. Carlos refuses to help me because he can't stand the idea of me being by his side. He'd rather see me at rock bottom than give me a chance." Carlos remained silent for a few seconds, letting the words hang in the air. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, waiting for a reaction. Marta, with tears in her eyes, pleaded, "Carlos, say something. Prove that isn't true." The businessman took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Daniel, I have never wished you harm.
But you aren't telling the whole truth. You've had jobs before and lost them because of irresponsibility. I know this. I have proof. My refusal isn't about being cold. It's about being responsible." Daniel turned pale, but quickly recovered. "That's a lie. You're making this up to justify your arrogance. You'd slander me in front of our own mother just to protect yourself." His tone was aggressive, but it betrayed a clear nervousness. Marta looked from one son to the other, confused and shaken. Carlos' firm continued. "I can't hire you because I can't risk the future of my company and the employees who depend on it because of your choices. This isn't a lack of love, it's reality." The table broke into murmurs. Some people looked shocked, while others seemed to have suspected what Carlos was revealing. Anna remained silent, but her gaze conveyed unconditional support for her husband. Daniel, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, stood up abruptly. "If that's how it is, I don't need you or your pity. I'd rather make it on my own than accept this humiliation." His dramatic exit left the room in complete silence. Marta, through her tears, just murmured, "My God, what has happened to my boys?" Carlos bowed his head, knowing the wound was now open. But he also felt that, for the first time, he had put the truth on the table. After Daniel's abrupt departure, silence ruled the room. Marta was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Carlos, is all of that true? Did he really lose jobs because he was irresponsible?" Her voice was barely a whisper, a mix of pain and disbelief. Carlos nodded slowly, his own eyes glistening. "Mom, I never wanted it to come to this, but I couldn't carry this weight by myself any longer. I never wanted to expose Daniel, but I also couldn't keep being accused of cruelty when I was only trying to protect what I've built." Marta covered her face with her hands, trying to digest what he was saying. Deep down, she remembered small signs of Daniel's behavior: inconsistent excuses, constant lateness, broken promises. Now those memories took on a new, painful meaning. Anna, seeing how fragile Marta was, stepped closer and put a hand on her shoulder. "Miss Marta, I know this is hard to accept, but Carlos didn't do this out of selfishness. He loves him. He just can't allow the company to become hostage to irresponsibility."
Her mother remained silent for a few minutes, absorbing the revelations. Her heart was torn between a mother's instinct to protect and the painful realization of the truth. Finally, she sighed. "I don't know how to help either of you anymore. I just wanted you to support each other, not destroy one another." Carlos held his mother's hand firmly. "I still hope that one day Daniel will understand I'm not against him. But for that to happen, he has to want to change. I can't do that for him." His voice was steady, but filled with sadness. In that moment, Marta saw a burden in her eldest son that she had never noticed before. The image of him being cold-hearted began to dissolve before her eyes. Perhaps, after all, Carlos wasn't the villain of the story, but the only one willing to face the truth. The dinner ended without any sense of resolution. Everyone retreated in silence, as if carrying a piece of grief with them. Carlos left with the feeling that he had taken a necessary step, but one that had come at a high cost. In the car, Anna looked at him and said, "You did what had to be done. The truth hurts, but it sets you free." Carlos just nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. He knew the battle wasn't over yet. In the days that followed, Daniel disappeared. He didn't answer phone calls or respond to messages. Not even his mother knew where he was. His silence, however, spoke louder than any accusation. It was the sign of a definitive break. Marta was devastated and cried every night. She felt powerless in the face of the distance between her sons. "I've lost my family's unity," she lamented. Carlos tried to console her, but he also suffered from his brother's absence. Among the relatives, the division remained. Some were starting to accept Carlos's version, especially after hearing rumors about Daniel's past. Others still saw him as cold and calculating. His public image within the family remained fractured. At work, the tension also persisted. Even though the company remained stable, Carlos noticed curious looks about his personal life. The mixing of business and family that he had always feared was now haunting him inevitably. One quiet night, Carlos received an unexpected message. It was from Daniel. It was short, but filled with bitterness. "Don't worry, I'll never ask you for anything again. But don't ever count on me as your brother again either." The impact of the words hit him like a punch. Anna tried to comfort him, but Carlos remained silent for hours. He felt guilty, even though he knew his decision had been the right one. The line between right and wrong seemed blurrier than ever. Marta, upon hearing about the message, cried even more. "You both let your pride do the talking. Now I don't know if there's any way back." Her words echoed like a desperate lament.
Carlos, however, knew it hadn't been about pride. It had been about necessity. He couldn't sacrifice his company and everyone who depended on it just to spare his brother from facing reality. But even so, the price of that choice ate away at him. The rift between the two brothers seemed final. Daniel's silence was like a growing chasm, and Marta's pain turned every family gathering into a minefield of resentment. Carlos looked to the future and wondered, was there still room for redemption? Or had the bond with his brother been destroyed forever? Months passed since the last confrontation. The silence between Carlos and Daniel remained like an invisible wall, difficult to breach. Still, life moved on. Carlos buried himself in work, expanding the company and reinforcing the values of merit and discipline that had always guided him. Marta, although still sad, began to accept that her sons needed to walk different paths. Gradually, she stopped blaming Carlos and started to see in him not just a rigid businessman, but the son who had always supported the family with responsibility. The hurt didn't disappear, but it gave way to a quiet understanding. Daniel, for his part, discreetly reappeared at family functions, though he kept his distance from his brother. He seemed more worn down, but there were signs of change. He had gotten a simple job at another company, and while it wasn't his ideal, it seemed like a first step towards starting over. Seeing him from afar, Carlos felt a mix of pain and hope. They didn't approach each other, exchanging no more than brief greetings, but something in Daniel's eyes seemed different, less arrogance, more resignation. Perhaps he was finally beginning to understand what had always been explained to him. Anna, as always, was his foundation. Wounds take time to heal. The important thing is that you stayed true to your principles. One day he might recognize that. Carlos agreed, but deep down he wished that day would come before it was too late. On lonely nights, he reflected on the choices he had made. He discovered that loving your family doesn't always mean giving in. Sometimes it means setting boundaries that can lead to growth. It was a hard lesson, learned at the cost of tears and broken relationships. The company continued to thrive, becoming even more solid. Employees saw in Carlos not just a demanding leader, but someone who kept his word and didn't make exceptions. His reputation as a businessman strengthened, even if the family cost had been high. Still, Carlos's heart held a quiet hope that one day he could reconcile with Daniel not as boss and employee, but as brothers who had each learned in their own way to grow from adversity. The impact of that decision spread beyond the two of them. The entire family began to discuss responsibility, choices, and the true definition of support more openly. The pain transformed into a collective reflection. And deep down, Carlos knew
The story wasn't completely over yet. The end of this battle could, one day, give way to a new beginning. Maybe not immediately, maybe not easily, but it was possible. After all, as fragile as blood ties can be, they rarely break forever. And now I ask you, would you have done the same as Carlos? Or would you have helped your brother at any cost? If this story made you think, subscribe to the channel and join this community that lives every emotion intensely. Here, every video brings dilemmas that can change how you see life and family.